بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, respected brothers and sisters, today's Halaqa I try to find a topic that is in relation to the upcoming month of Ramadan, but is also applicable to any moment of the year, because Alhamdulillah, Ramadan is a very auspicious month. May Allah help us reach it with afiyah and iman. But sometimes when a person doesn't have the mindset that is effective and efficient throughout the year, then they kind of go through what is known as burnout and lethargy. You know, you go really hard for a short amount of time, and then you run out of gas, and then you don't have that momentum that propels you throughout the year. So I was going to share a few notes from different books in front of me, but the focus is two main themes. Is that how fasting is something that helps us understand that we are spiritual beings inside a physical body, and not a physical body with a spirit inside. That our essence is our ruh in our soul, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a very comprehensive religion and sharia for us, that there are needs that fulfill both. So that's one point of the lecture. The other point is that what are things we can do to strengthen our arwah, our souls, and as fasting is a means of suppressing our nufus and our nafs. So bear with me, inshallah, if it's too much information to take in. I just wanted to kind of cover things at a surface level and not go in depth in one, so we kind of move from one topic to another. But first and foremost is to understand that in our religion, that one of the key principles is دفع الضرر أولى من جلب المنافع أو درء المفاسد أولى من جلب المصالح. That a bigger priority is to avoid harm than it is to attain benefit, right? So giving that in light of the topic is, when we go into Ramadan, there's so many righteous deeds we want to do. I want to read this much Quran, I want to do this much dhikr, I want to give this much charity, I want to pray this much qiyam, which is beautiful. But one thing, advising, while still not being too older than you myself, is that in the age we are as youth, is that our shahwat, our desires are very high, right? And how we can have the mindset that if I leave off these bad things, if I leave off these sins, this is something that will propel me forth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that may be superior to doing these extra meritorious deeds, right? As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, اتَّقِ اللَّهَ فِي الْمَحَارِمِ تَكُونَ عَبْدَ النَّاسِ. And if you have consciousness of Allah, to leave off the prohibited deeds, then you have worshipped Allah the most. And the example you give is like someone has a bank account, right? One person, all they do is deposit. Their withdrawal is very less. But another person, their withdrawal is so much, it's gonna come to maybe a zero or negative balance because they're not depositing enough. So to Allah belongs the best examples, but our heart is in that way. That if we expose it more to good deeds, it will become more enlightened, and it will become that heart that Allah, He says, اليوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. That on the day of judgment, someone's wealth nor progeny will not benefit them, except he who comes to Allah with a sound heart. So this is one focus of Ramadan, that in the day we suppress our body, its needs of food, drink, and also carnal pleasures between a husband and wife. And at night we engage in qiyam and we pray, we read Quran, right? So our ruh, our soul is from the higher realm, and our body is from this earth. So everything this body needs is on this earth. We don't import something from another planet that this body needs. Everything is on this earth. But our ruh, what it needs also comes from the higher realm, and that's revelation, is Quran. Right? So I'll start off with a quote of Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. in his book Al-Fawaid, where he says the relationship between the soul, al-ruh, and al-badan, the body. So he says, خلق بدن ابن آدم من الأرض. خلق بدن ابن آدم من الأرض. The body of the human being was created from this earth, right? So as Muslims, we don't believe in evolution. You know, Allah, through His infinite might and power, He originated the first human being, and He honored the human being. وروحه من ملكوت السماء, and his soul is from the realms of the celestial skies. وقرن بينهما فإذا أجاع بدنه وأسهره وأقامه في الخدمة وجدت روحه خفة وراحة. He says that the relationship between the body and the soul, he says, is that when his body feels some hunger and he keeps it awake at night, he doesn't sleep as much, and he establishes it in the service of Allah, his soul will feel a type of lightness, and it will feel a type of relaxation and joy. Right? So a lot of people, when they have, I'm not saying we should not seek help from mental health professionals, but a lot of, symptoms of be it, anxiety, depression, right? People are trying to find that inner peace of their soul through the physical means of this world, be it through substance abuse or whatnot, right? And these are things that Allah in His infinite knowledge and wisdom created. These illnesses do exist, but not Muslims who claim that everything is from, spiritual illnesses. But at the same time, it's wrong to say that everything is through the lens of, Freud's psychology in the last, half century or so, or more. There are reality of spiritual illnesses, but that ruh, that soul, what it needs, it comes kind of with a, kind of like a seesaw between the body suppressing its needs and the soul feeling, it being taken care of more. But he gives the other example. He says, وَإِذَا أَشْبَعَهُ وَنَعَّمَهُ وَنَوَّمَهُ وَاشْتَغَلَ بِخِدْمَتِهِ وَرَاحَتِهِ. But when he feeds his body till he's totally full, like he eats so much, and he sleeps too much, and he engages in serving his body and his carnal pleasures, أخلد البدن إلى الموضع الذي خلق منه فانجذبت الروح منه فصارت في السجن. Then its body is going to incline more to this earth. It will not have that that spiritual state that is reflective of the first category. And then the quote continues, but the point I wanted to focus on and how it relates to the topic that I had mentioned before is that فآثر أحسن المعيشتين وأطيبهما وأدومها واشق البدن بنعيم الروح ولا تشقي الروح بنعيم البدن فإن نعيم الروح وشقاءها أعظم وأدوم ونعيم البدن وشقاؤه أقصر وأهون والله المستعان. So he mentions that we should prioritize those which are the pure and more long-lasting of the two lives. Our soul never dies. Our body is temporal. What we have in this world is finite, but the soul will continue forever and ever. And then he explains that don't make your soul wretched at the expense of your body, because the felicity of the soul and its wretchedness is forever and long-lasting. But the joys of the body and its wretchedness is more limited and lower in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then going back to the topic of leaving sins, he said that the true scholar, he doesn't command people to just absolve or kind of abstain from the worldly life. Our religion is not a religion of monasticism, rahbaniyah, right? We are applying the rules of our religion by engaging in society and going to work, going to school, universities. But he says that the scholar, he commands the people ولكن يأمرهم بترك الذنوب مع إقامتهم على الدنيا. The scholar tells the people at the first level for the general Muslim is to leave off sins while they engage in the world life. وترك الدنيا فضيلة وترك الذنوب فريضة فكيف يؤمر بالفضيلة من لم يقم الفريضة. He says giving off the pleasures of this life that is not a necessity, that is something that is meritorious. But he says leaving off sins, that is an obligation. And how can a person be commanded to do the meritorious when they are not able to do the fard? So that was the first reading. And then the next point that kind of tells into, I'm not here to tell everybody what their Ramadan schedule should be. I think we're all, different levels and have different objectives and different schedules. So every person can go about that. But there's kind of like some ground rules that Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he mentions in his book, Bidayatul Hidayah. So in his first preface, he talks about the importance of knowledge and how the person should be sincere in seeking knowledge. And then along with knowledge, obviously comes application of that knowledge and practice. So he says that, know that the commands of Allah, they divide in two categories. That which is an obligation or compulsory, and those which are meritorious and extra. He says, فَالْفَرْضُ رَأْسُ الْمَالِ. The obligatory is like the capital. If a person wants any business, they first need capital, right? So as a Muslim, to actually have some reward and an active, kind of bank account with Allah and in Islam, they have to fulfill the fara'id. وَبِهِ تَحْصُلُ النَّجَاةِ. And through fulfilling these obligatory acts, they will attain salvation. وَالنَّفْلُ هُوَ الرِّبْحُ وَبِهِ الْفَوْزُ دَرَجَاتٍ. And he says that the meritorious, that is the actual profit that is gained from the capital, and through that they can attain higher ranks. And then he mentions a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Its wording is not off, but the actual wording is found in many famous books like Sahih al-Bukhari and the sacred hadith where Allah, he says that ولا يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه. Allah, he says that أفضل ما يتقرب إلي عبدي بشيء أحب إلي مما افترضته عليه. My slave will not come closer to me with something more beloved than that which I made obligatory on him. And then Allah, he says, and my slave will continuously do meritorious deeds, extra deeds, until I love him. So he's trying to quote that hadith, but he uses different wording. And then he says, وَلَنْ تَصِلْ أَيُّهَا الطَّالِبُ إِلَى الْقِيَامِ بِأَوَامِرِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى إِلَّا بِمُرَاقَبَةِ قَلْبِكَ وَجَوَارِحِكَ فِي لَحَظَاتِكَ وَأَنفَاسِكَ مِنْ حِينَ تُمْسِي إِلَى حِينَ تُصْبِحُ. And then he explains that how can a believer fulfill the commandments of Allah. He says, O student or O seeker, you will never be able to establish the commandments of Allah until you monitor your heart and limbs in every moment. Like that's one of the first steps, is a person is actually aware of what they're doing. They're not kind of like on autopilot. Sometimes we get programmed and people do things subconsciously, but an important key for the life of the heart is to actually think before the person actually does an action. And he says you should, until you monitor your heart and actions in every moment and every breath, from the time you wake up until the time you sleep. And he says, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى مُطَّلِعٌ عَلَى ضَمِيرِ. Know that Allah is closely observing your innermost heart. وَمُشْرِفٌ عَلَى ظَاهِرِكَ. And He beholds, وَمُشْرِفٌ عَلَى ظَاهِرِكَ وَبَاطِنِكَ. And He beholds your inner and outer being. And he says, وَمُحِيطٌ بِجَمِيعِ خَطَرَاتِكَ وَلَحَظَاتِكَ وَخَطَوَاتِكَ. And he says that no thought, moment, or step of yours escapes His regard. وَسَائِرَ سَكَنَاتِكَ وَحَرَكَاتِكَ. And all of your stillness or movement. وَأَنَّكَ فِي مُخَالَطَتِكَ وَخَلَوَاتِكَ مُتَرَدِّدٌ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. And both in the company of others and while you're in solitude, you are ever in the presence of Allah. Allah is present through His knowledge and His encompassing the acts of that believer. As believers, Muslims, we don't believe Allah is omnipresent, that Allah is everywhere, right? Subhanahu wa ta'ala, but His knowledge, His hearing, seeing, His witnessing of our effects, our actions are, are pertinent to whatever the slaves of His creation may be. And then He says that فلا يسكن في الملك والملكوت ساكن ولا يتحرك متحرك إلا وجبار السماوات والأرض مطلع عليه. It says in both the hidden and manifest dominions, nothing that is still, and nothing moves that moves, except that the compeller of the heavens and the earth, meaning Allah, is aware of it. Then he quotes the verse of the Quran in Surah Al-Ghafir, يَعْلَمُ خَائِنَةَ الْأَعْيُنِ وَمَا تُخْفِي الصُّدُورُ. Allah knows the treachery of the eyes and that which the hearts or chests conceal. And Allah, He says, يَعْلَمُ سِرَّ وَأَخْفَى. Allah knows that which is secret, that's shared between two people, right? وَأَخْفَى, what is more hidden, is that person's inner thoughts themselves. And then He gives the advice, فَتَأَدَّبْ أَيُّهَا الْمِسْكِينُ ظَاهِرًا وَبَاطِنًا بَيْنَ يَدَيِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى تَأَدُّبَ الْعَبْدِ الذَّلِيلِ الْمُذْنِبِ فِي حَضْرَةِ الْجَبَّارِ الْقَهَّارِ. It says, therefore, O destitute one, cultivate a deep courtesy with the divine in your outer self as well as your inner self. The courtesy and bearing of a humble erring slave in the presence of his supreme, all-powerful master. وَاجْتَهِدْ أَنْ لَا يَرَاكَ مَوْلَاكَ حَيْثُ نَهَاكَ. And then going back to the topic of leaving sins, he says that work hard so that your master, Allah, does not see you where He has forbidden you from. وَلَا يَفْقِدَكَ حَيْثُ أَمْرَكَ. And Allah should not find you absent from where He commanded you to be in action. وَلَن تَقْدِرَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ إِلَّا بِأَن تُوَزِّعَ أَوْقَاتَكَ وَتُرَتِّبْ أَوْرَادَكَ مِنْ صَبَاحِكَ إِلَى مَسَاءٍ. Then He gives the advice, what is the action item? He said, you will never be able to do so until you have made basically like a schedule or a regimen by managing your time and organizing your routine of worship from morning to night. فَاصْغِ إِلَى مَا يُلْقَى إِلَيْكَ مِنْ أَوَامِرِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى عَلَيْكَ مِنْ حِينَ تَسْتَيْقِظُ مِنْ مَنَامِكَ إِلَى وَقْتِ رُجُوعِكَ إِلَى مَضْجِعِكَ. Then he explains, he says, so pay attention to what is presented to you here concerning the commands that Allah Most High has laid upon you from the time you wake up to the time you sleep. And then I advise anybody who wants the book, it's available in English translation by White Thread Press. And he gives it advices for different moments of the day, how we can make our whole life ibadah. That is a unique thing about Islam, is that our worship is not just when we're in prayer or in the masjid. But as Imam Ibn Taymiyyah defined worship, and looking at all the texts of the religion, that he understood was that al-ibadah ismun jami'un likulli ma yuhibbuhu Allah wa yardahu min al-aqwali wal-af'ali zahiratan wa batin. Worship, ibadah, is that everything Allah loves, from a comprehensive word of everything Allah loves, from statements and actions, inner and outward. This is what he defined as worship. So the last part of tonight's inshallah lecture is I think I have, yeah, inshallah. So I was going to read about how sins are in different categories. This is a summary of Imam Ghazali's book Ihya Ulumuddin. The origin is Ihya Ulumuddin, but a very famous abridged version, kind of like a summary of a summary, Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin of Imam Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi. So he did an abridgment of Abu Faraj ibn al-Jawzi, had Minhaj al-Qasidin, and Imam Ghazali Ihya Ulumuddin. So when we fast, we are now, still human beings, right? We don't become like some supernatural being, but we are now attaining kind of like angelic qualities. Because the angels, they don't eat and they don't sleep, right? They're always perpetually in the worship of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And that's why in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Quran, when he saw the guests coming to him in the form of humans, at first he didn't know that they were angels, right? And then he said, فَرَاغَ
إلى أهله.
فراغ إلى أهله فجاء بعجل سمين one ayah فجاء بعجل حنيذ in the other verse that he brought a large ram or like kind of animal and he had roasted it فقال ما لكم فقال ألا تأكلون. He asked him, why will you not eat? So anyway, after they had explained that what the purpose they had come from, we learned that the angels, they do not need food and they do not need sleep. They give praise to Allah day and night and they don't stop from that. And that's why one of the stories of Fatima anha, when her family had attained such hunger, she came to the Prophet and said, "Oh Prophet of Allah, the angels, their food is tasbih, glorifying Allah. So what is our food?" Like she didn't want to complain about her state, but they were that hungry, So even in that state, the Prophet ﷺ, he gave her the kind of praise of Allah so that she can get her needs fulfilled through dua. That Ya awwal al-awwalin wa ya akhir al-akhirin wa ya dhul quwwati al-matin wa ya rahim al-masakin wa ya arham al-rahim. That O Allah, the first of all and the last of all, and the possessor of might and strength, and the one who has mercy on the poor, and the most merciful of those who show mercy. So anyhow, the text, it says that اعلم أن للإنسان أخلاقا وأوصافا كثيرة لكن تنحسر مثارات الذنوب في أربع صفات. It says, know that the human being has many different characteristics and traits, and you can combine all the sins into 4 different categories. Right? So he says, number 1, أحدها صفات الربوبية. That one is those traits that only belong to Allah, that a human being, because of their wretchedness, is seeking. And he gives the example of al-kibr, like pride and arrogance, wal-fakhr, wa-hubb al-madh wal-thana, loving to be praised, and wal-izzu wa talab al-isti'la, seeking highness and loftiness, wa-nahwi dhalik, and the likes of it. وَهَذِهِ ذُنُوبُ مُهْلِكَاتِ. He said these are destructive sins. وَبَعْضُ النَّاسِ يَغْفَلُ عَنْهَا. And many people, or some people, are heedless of, unaware. فَلَا يَعُدُّهَا ذُنُوبًا, and they do not consider them sins. الثانية صفات الشيطانية. He says number 2 is those traits that are like devilish traits, devil-like traits. ومنها يتشعب البغي والحسد والحيل والخداع والمكر والغش والنفاق والأمر بالفساد ونحو ذلك. He says from this category comes transgression. People like become serial killers. Like there's no fa'idah or benefit or even like anything remotely close to like having he says envy and mock and plotting, planning, scheming, and deception and hypocrisy, and joining for corruption and the likes of it. Then the third one, which is more common, he said sifatul bahimiyya, the qualities that are like animals, and the animals that are non-predatory. And he says from this branches off الشر والحرص على قضاء شهوة البطن والفرج, the desire to constantly fill the stomach and enjoy the reproductive organ, or fulfill one's carnal pleasures. Or from that comes zina, illicit sex, or luwata, is like anal sex, or it could be sodomy, or sariqa, and theft. And then the fourth one, he says sifatu sad'iyya, the qualities of predatory animals. So from that comes off al-ghadab wal-hiqd, rage and rancor, والتهجم على الناس بالقتل, and attacking people and murder, والضرب, or physically assaulting them, وأخذ الأموال, or taking their wealth. وهذه الصفات لها تدرج في الفطرة. And he says these 4 categories, they have like a order and and synchronization, that which ones come first and which ones come later. He says that the qualities of the non-predatory animals, these are the first ones people usually engage in. And then he says after that comes the quality of the predatory animals, then after that comes the qualities of the devils. And then if that person, he says, he does not, guard himself, then excuse me, before he says that, he says, فهذه أمهات الذنوب ومنابعها. He said these are the origins of sins, and ثم تنفجر الذنوب من هذه المنابع إلى الجوارح. Then these sins now, they go from these places into the limbs of the human beings. فبعضها في القلب, some are in the heart, like kufr, disbelief, or hypocrisy, or innovation. وإضمار السوء وبعضها في العين وبعضها في السمع, some are in the eye, some in the ear, or hearing and seeing. وبعضها في اللسان, some in speech, some in the stomach or the reproductive organ. وبعضها في اليدين والرجلين, some in the hands and the feet. وبعضها على جميع البدن, some are applicable to the whole body. ولا حاجة إلى تفاصيل ذلك فإنه واضح. He says there's no need to explain this, it is clear. ثم الذنوب تنقسم إلى ما تتعلق بحقوق الآدميين إلى ما بين العبد وبين ربه. Then he says the sins, they divide into that which applies to the rights of Allah, or that which applies to the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فالعفو فيه أرجى وأقرب. As for the, والذي بين العبد وبين ربه, فما يتعلق بحقوق العباد, that which applies to the rights of servants, the creation, فالأمر فيه أغلب, then it is more strict. Why? Because Allah is most just. He will give the victim the ability to ask for their recompense on the day of judgment. And he says, وَالَّذِي بَيْنَ الْعَبْدِ وَبَيْنَ رَبِّهِ, as for those sins between a slave and his Lord, فَالْعَفُ فِيهِ أَرْجَى وَأَقْرَبُ, then Allah's pardon is more hoped for and more near. إِلَّا أَن يَكُونَ شِرْكًا وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, except it is major shirk, polytheism. فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي لَا يُغْفَرُ, and then he mentions that it is something that will not be forgiven, as Allah says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ. Allah does not forgive that he be attributed a partner with him. وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. So inshallah, for the sake of time, I'll leave that up. And then the last part I just wanted to combine is like, it's common knowledge, right? A Muslim from a young child is taught this is haram, this is haram. Like this, knowing the sin is common. The one beautiful thing that I came across in the book of Ibn al-Qayyim, the disease and the cure, is like actually knowing like how the harms of sins can prevent a person from getting in that situation in the first place. It's like a lot of times Muslims, when we grow up, even it could not only be in a non-Muslim country, but in a Muslim country, and there's not an understanding from either parents or elders to kind of explain the wisdoms behind certain commandments. Because in our religion there's something known as the hikmah, or the illah, or the sabab, the reason why things have been mandated. And another thing is to know the maqasid al-sharia. What are the objectives of our sharia when certain laws have been put in place? So he explains this a long introduction, but the point that I got to in the book here is that he explains to the person who wrote him a letter where he was afraid if he got into a sin that it would ruin his dunya and his akhirah. So the Imam, he started off his book by giving him advice to do dua. He explained the different rulings and components of dua. And then he explained, just like in the temporal world, when you have a physical ailment, you seek treatment. You seek, medical treatment or medicine, something for that illness. So similarly in our religion, that Allah has connected, bad acts with bad conditions and good acts with good conditions. And then after he gives that introduction, he explains what are some of the harms of sins. So some are like, kind of medical. They are in the physical world. You cannot see the manifestation of his sin in the physical world, and some are in the spiritual or metaphysical realm. A person notices it in their own heart and spirit. So the first one he says is that through sins a person is actually blocked from rizq. Some people do sins because they're seeking rizq, right? They say wherever there's poverty, there's crime. If you look in Medina, there was poverty, but the Prophet ﷺ taught his companions taqwa and self-restraint, and they didn't go seeking their needs through sin, right? They didn't go through crime. There's a hadith, وَإِنَّ الرَّجُلَ لَيَحْرُمُ الرِّزْقُ بِذَنْبٍ يُصِيبُهُ أَوْ بِخَطِيئَةٍ يَعْمَلُهَا. A man is prevented rizq by the sin he does. An example of that is that in the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, he was traveling and he wanted to leave his horse or camel ride tied at the pillar of the masjid, so he could pray in the masjid and then continue. So his, I guess it was his horse because camels don't need it, but they kind of put the mask over it so that the dust, its mouth is open, but it keeps the dust out of its kind of face and eyelids. So when he came out of the masjid, he saw that the person, had taken it from his horse. So he went to the market to buy a new one, and then he found that man that he had crossed paths with when he entered the masjid. He's calling people, who wants to buy this, horse mask for this much amount, like 4 dinar, if I'm not mistaken. So Ali went to him and said, look, I was gonna give you some money in a halal way, even though there was not a mutual agreement between us, but you now are seeking it through a haram means, right? So through doing sins, a person can be deprived of rizq. Another way sins harm is they deprive of religious knowledge. In the story of Imam al-Shafi'i, he went to Medina by foot. He was an orphan, he was very poor. He was born in Gaza, and his mother took him to Mecca at a young age, and that's where he learned his primary education. And then he got strong enough, in knowledge to study with the scholars of Mecca. Then he went to Medina to learn from Imam Malik. So he would sit in the gathering of Imam Malik, and everybody would take notes on like a scroll or something. But Shafi'i didn't have paper because he was poor. So he would take saliva on his tongue and write on his hand. So Malik, he thought this was bad manners. So he came to him and said, why don't you take notes? He said, I memorized the whole Muwatta, the book of hadith that he had compiled, which I think is over 1,000 or so hadith. So he told him, read. So he started reading from memory with the sanad, the chain of transmission, and the matan of the hadith. So he had covered almost 40%. And then Imam Malik told him, and he said, إِنِّي أَرَى أَنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ قَذَفَ فِي قَلْبِكَ نُورًا فَلَا تُطْفِئْهُ بِظُلْمَةٍ مَعْصِيَةٍ. He said, I see Allah has enlightened your heart with the knowledge of light, the knowledge of knowledge, I have seen that Allah has enlightened your heart with the light of knowledge. So do not extinguish that light by doing sins. Sins make the heart dark. Another example in the life of al-Shafi'i was that he had such a sharp memory. Like if he was trying to memorize the right side of the manuscript or the book, then he would cover the left side, because if his eye saw the left side, he would memorize that too. That's how his memory was. But after some time, he found he could not memorize. So he asked his teacher, Imam Waki' ibn Jarrah, he's one of the famous narrators of hadith, and he said that شَكَوْتُ إِلَىٰ وَكِيعٍ سُوءَ حِفْظِي, I complained to Imam Waki' that my memory became weak. فَأَرْشَدَنِي إِلَىٰ تَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي. So Imam Waki' advised me to stay away from sin. وَقَالَ إِنَّ الْعِلْمَ نُورٌ مِّنْ إِلَهِ وَلَا يُهْدَى نُورُ اللَّهِ إِلَىٰ عَاصِي. He said because knowledge is a light from Allah, and Allah doesn't give that to the sinful. Another thing that sins do, and we've seen it recently, and we're not blaming them for it, is natural disasters, what they call natural disasters, right? So Allah, He says in the Quran, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ. That the corruption in the land and the sea spreads by the sins that people's hands have earned. يُذِيقَهُمْ بَعْضَ الَّذِي عَمِلُوا لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Allah makes them taste some of the ramifications of the evil deeds, so that they may return to Allah. And then the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that إِذَا اتَّخَذَ الْفَيْءُ طُولًا وَالْأَمَانَةُ مَغْرَمًا وَالزَّكَاةُ مَغْرَمًا when the spoils of war will be taken as like personal property, and when zakat is seen as a burden, and people will use the amana, trust, as their personal property. وَتُعَلِّمُ لِغَيْرِ الدِّينِ, and people will learn knowledge of religion for other than the religion itself. وَأَطَاعَ الرَّجُلُ إِمْرَأَتَهُ وَعَقَّ أُمَّهُ. A man will obey his wife but disobey his mother. Now this is not saying a man has to pick one. They both have rights. But of course, as we know, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that he was asked which woman has the most rights over a man. He said his mother. And then he asked him, which man has the most rights over a woman? And he said, her husband. Right? So a man will obey his wife and disobey his mother. وَأَدْنَى صَدِيقَهُ أَقْصَى أَبَاهُ. And he will be close and loving with his friends, but he will kind of desert his father and leave his father distant. And then he says, وَأَدْنَى صَدِيقَهُ أَقْصَى أَبَاهُ. And وكان سادة القبيلة فاسقهم وكان زعيم القوم أفضلهم وأكرم الرجل مخافة شره وشربت الخمور ولعن آخر هذه الأمة أولها فارتقبوا عند ذلك ريحا حمراء وزلزلا وخسفا ونصفا وآيات متتابع كنظام سلك إن قطعت سلكه فتتابع. He mentioned many things. Like the worst of the people will become their leader, the worst of the tribe will become their leader or their chief, and that people will drink alcohol openly, and the end of this ummah will curse the beginning of this ummah. Then the Prophet said, when that happens, then wait for very strong winds. Allah knows if this is tornadoes and very strong winds, and earthquakes, and people actually being sunk into the ground. And he says these trials will come. It's like when you have a tasbih with the beads on it, if you cut the string and they just fall like the Quran line, these trials will come. So anyway, these things happen through the evil deeds of the human beings. Another ill effect of sins is having tyrannical rulers, right? As the saying is, كَمَا تَكُونُ سَيُوَلَّ عَلَيْكُمْ. Just as this society acts, good for good, bad for bad, that's how you will be given leadership over you, right? So I'm not saying not to be politically engaged, but to understand that it's not beating other people at their own game of politics, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He chooses good leaders when the people are good, and He tests them with bad leaders when their actions are bad. So it's not from the Prophet ﷺ, it's from the Isra'iliyat, the traditions before our ummah. But Wahab ibn Nabi mentions, Malik ibn Dinar, he mentions that Allah, He says in a sacred hadith, or Allah, He said in the Isra'iliyat, Ana Malikul Mulk wa Malikul Mulk. I am the king of kings, and I am the owner of kingdom. The king's hearts are in my hand. The king's heart is in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I shouldn't make this movement, it's just kind of subtle because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes are nothing like His creation. But we believe them as He had mentioned them, and as the early generations affirmed them, without giving a how to it, or with not comparing it to His creation, or without distorting them, or without abandoning them altogether or changing the meaning. So anyhow, Allah says the king's hearts are in my hands. And then my servants, when they obey me, Allah, He says, I turn the hearts of the kings towards them with sympathy and mercy. And when my servants disobey me, then I turn the hearts of the kings towards them with through hatred and punishment. فَسَامُوهُمْ سُوءَ الْعَذَابِ. The tyrannical rulers, they punish them the worst of punishments, and they persecute them the worst of persecution. Then Allah, He says, فَلَا تَشْغُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ بِالدُّعَاءِ عَلَى الذُّنُوبِ وَلَكِنْ شُغُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ بِالذِّكْرِ وَالتَّضَرُّعِ كَيْ أَكْفِيَكُمْ شَرَّ مُلُوكِكُم. But in that time, don't waste your time cursing the ruler, making dua, oh Allah, curse. But Allah, He says, busy yourselves with dhikr and remembrance of Allah, obedience of Allah, and humbleness before Allah. Allah, He says, He will suffice them, the evil of His creation. And then to conclude, there's some other harms He mentions is that the curse of Allah can come through sins. And there are some sins that are mentioned explicitly in a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the curse of Allah is on. For example, the one who gives tattoos and gets tattoos. Number 2 is fake hair extensions. Number 3, being involved in riba, interest. Number 4 is theft. Number 5 is being associated with alcohol. There's many different stages. From the Prophet said, the one who grows the grapes, who crushes the grapes, who transports it, who carries it, who buys it, who sells it, who delivers it. All these things are cursed. One who curses their parents. One who imitates the opposite gender. And a Muslim who points a weapon at a fellow Muslim. And speaking ill of the earlier generations. All these categories in different hadith have been cursed by the Messenger of saying the curse. And then the end is those, what are the effects of sins on the heart, so that the person is cautious before doing it. So Allah, He mentions that sins can blind the heart, right? أفلم يسيروا في الأرض فتكون لهم قلوب يعقلون بها أو آذان يسمعون بها فإنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب التي في الصدور. As the Jews said, وقالوا قلوبنا غلف بل طبع الله عليها بكفرهم فلا يؤمنون إلا قليلا. That Allah, He sealed the heart of the people once they do so much sins. Allah, He says, will they not travel in the land so that there can be for them hearts that can understand and ears that listen. And Allah, He says, it is not the eye that is blind, but it is the heart that is inside of the chest. And then sins can take the fold, one out of the fold of Iman. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he was asked about the meaning of the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يزني الرجل حين يزني وهو مؤمن ولا يسرق السارق حين يسرق وهو مؤمن ولا يشرب الخمر حين يشربها وهو مؤمن. That the man, he in the act of zina, when he's doing illicit sex, he is not a believer. And the one in the act of theft, he is not a believer. And the one who is in drinking alcohol, he is not a believer while he is drinking. So he gave the example, he said, this is like the iman and this is the person, right? They're normally together. But when they do that sin, the iman goes up while they're doing it, and after the sin, if they make tawbah, it goes up. So may Allah save us. What if a person dies in that condition? Sins can make one forgetful of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Do not be like those who forgot Allah, so they forgot themselves, and they are those who do immoral, in public sins, like without any shyness or any embarrassment. And then sins, naturally, they decrease the awe of Allah in the heart of the person. And then another thing sin causes is wahsha. Wahsha is like, we're in a room of other people, right? But that person still feels lonely, because their heart has a place, like Imam al-Qayyim, he said, fil qalbi, that he said, inna fil qalbi wahshatun la yadhhabuha illa al-unsu billahi. That there is a loneliness in the heart. The only thing that brings solace to it is nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says that وفيه حزن لا يذهبها إلا السرور وفيه and in the heart there is a grief that the only thing that brings it happiness is the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the heart is a type of poverty and destitution, that the only thing that will take it away is seeking refuge with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then another thing that sins do is that Ibn Abbas has a statement. He said there are 5 sins or 5 components of a sin that's worse than the sin itself. Number 1 is to take pride and happiness in the sin. That's worse than the sins. Number two is when the person didn't get the chance to do the sin and they felt sad, man, I didn't get to do it. That's worse than the sin itself. Another one he said is when the person is trying to do that sin in privacy, and let's say they had in their days they had a curtain, he mentioned, but in our days if they lock the door and they feel embarrassed that, oh, what if somebody sees me, and they walk in instead of thinking Allah sees me, he says that is worse than the sin itself. And the other two I don't recall at the moment. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions that through understanding the opposite, that by doing sins things become difficult for the person. Because Allah, he said, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِ يُسْرًا. Whoever has cautiousness of Allah by fulfilling the commands and avoiding the sins, then Allah will make his affairs easy for him. So if the person doesn't have taqwa, then things will not be made easy for them. And then another hadith, the Prophet, he mentioned that من كانت النية همه أو من كانت الآخرة همه أو من كانت الآخرة همه جمع الله له أمره وجعل غناه في قلبه وآتته الدنيا وهي راغمة. The one who has the hereafter as their main goal and objective, Allah will gather all their affairs for them, and He will give him richness in his heart, and this world will come to him submissively. And the opposite, وَمَنْ كَانَتِ الدُّنْيَا هَمَّهُ, whoever's goal is just this world, not to fulfill their needs but out of greed, فَرَّقَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ أَمْرَهُ وَشَمْلَهُ, Allah will separate his needs for him. And then he says, وَجَعَلَ فَقْرَهُ بَيْنَ عَيْنَيْهِ, and poverty will always between his eyes. He keeps thinking, I need more. وَلَمْ يُؤْتِهِ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَا كُتِبَ لَهُ, and only what was written for him of this world will come back to him. And then sins that are not followed by the heart, sins that are not followed with tawbah, they harden the heart. The heart becomes hard. ثم قست قلوبكم من بعد ذلك فهي كالحجارة أو أشد قسوة. The heart becomes hard through the repetitive sin. That I think Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he said, رأيت الذنوب تميت القلوب وقد وخير لنفسك عصيانها. لا، رأيت الذنوب تميت القلوب وقد يورث الذل إدمانها وترك الذنوب حياة القلوب وخير لنفسك عصيانها. He said, I saw heart sins, they killed the heart. And a person addicted to sinning, it makes it binding or like almost, it makes it necessary that person become humiliated. And then he said, and leaving off sins is the life of the heart, and it is better for your ego, your nafs, to go against its desires. So another thing is that's dangerous, and we see this a lot in our younger generation on Snapchat, is actually boasting of the sin and publicizing it. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, كل أمة وعافة إلا المجاهرون. He said, all my ummah will be pardoned on the day of judgment, or eligible for pardon, except those who do their sins public. They asked, who are the mujahirun? He said, the one, أن يعمل الرجل في الليل عملا ثم يصبح فيقول يا فلان فعلت البارحة كذا فعلت البارحة كذا بات يستره ربه وأصبح يهتك ستره. He said when he wakes up, he has to tell his friends and people, I did this sin and that sin and that sin. And then he says that he went to sleep at night and Allah concealed his sin. But when he woke up, he uncovered the sitr and concealment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another evil thing of sin is that it can lead people to being associated with those who originated that sin. As the Prophet said, من تشبه بقوم فهو منهم. Whoever imitates the people is from them. In another narration, حشر معهم, they will be resurrected with them. We also miss out by sin being deprived of the dua of the angels. As Allah mentioned in Surah Al-Ghafir, that الذين يحملون العرش ومن حوله يسبحون بحمد ربهم ويستغفرون للذين آمنوا ربنا وسعت كل شيء رحمة وعلما فاغفر للذين تابوا واتبعوا سبيلك وقهم عذاب الجحيم. That the angels who hold the throne of Allah, they make a dua, O Allah, you encompass everything in your knowledge and mercy, so forgive those who make tawbah. So if the person is in the sin, they're not making tawbah. So inshallah, after they make tawbah, hopefully they'll be including this dua, but this is one thing to keep in mind. And then the last two is that the one who does a sin, they lose haya, they lose shyness and modesty. Because the Prophet said, إِنَّمَا أَدْرَكَ النَّاسُ وَالْكَلَامِ يَقُولُ الْأُولَى إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. What reached us from the scholars say, every prophet taught this to his people, that when you have no shame, do whatever you want. That's the key to things. People, I don't give a bleep, no F's given. I mean, they have no shyness. They do whatever they want to do, right? And that's a fact of their lack of actual integrity and morals. And then the last one is that calamities befall us in our sins because of, calamities fall us because of the sins we do. وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ وَيَعْفُو عَن كَثِيرٍ. Whatever has befallen you of a calamity, then know that it is from what your hands have earned, and Allah pardons much of it. So I'm sorry I took over too much time, but this is just things to keep in mind. So whenever we have fallen into a sin, things we can do is number one, tawbah. Because Allah, He says that أُولَٰئِكَ يُبَدِّلُ اللَّهُ سَيِّئَاتِهِمْ حَسَنَاتٍ إِلَّا مَنْ تَابَ وَآمَنَ وَعَمِلَ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. Whoever believes and does tawbah, righteous deeds, then Allah will change their sins into good deeds. And then follow a sin with a good deed. وَأَتْبِعْ سَيِّئَةً حَسَنَةً تَمْحُهَا. Follow a sin with a good deed, Allah will erase it. إِنَّ الْحَسَنَاتِ يُذْهِبْنَ السَّيِّئَاتِ ذَلِكَ ذِكْرَىٰ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And then sit in gatherings where you're hearing about things that boost your iman, right? Because iman is like fuel in a tank. When the fuel is low, or the battery is low, it won't go far. But if we have a boost of iman, we can stay away from these things and recite the Quran more and more. Because Quran is a shifa from the heart, and we make dua. This concludes our halaqa. Forgive me for taking too long. Salah is in about 5 minutes.